Women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home. For it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church.
Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites.
Jésus, par ton sang précieux, enlève mon iniquité. Regarde-moi sur les cieux, dis-moi que tu m'as pardonné. J'ai longtemps erré cœur rebelle, mais j'entends ta voix qui m'appelle. Au pied de ta croix maintenant, tout confus, brisé, je me rends. Blanc, blanc, plus blanc que neige, blanc, blanc, plus blanc que neige, lavé dans le sang de l'agneau, je serai plus blanc que la neige.
Now go, attack the Amalekites, and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. 1 Samuel 15.
Greetings, everyone. We are happy to welcome you to this 19th episode of God is Not White, our appointment of every Wednesday at 7 p.m. on J'Afrique Haïti, whether it is on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook. And we are also on TikTok tonight, so we greet all of you who have started to follow this program since December 25th, 2024. And so tonight, as usual, we're going to have a presentation, a few slides to guide the conversation. And I hope that you will be able to join us at the end of the program by dialing this number that you see on the screen, 613-482-2549, 613-482-2549. We are going to start taking calls at the end of this program. But first, the presentation, like we say, will follow the same format as we've had in previous weeks, where tonight the focus is liberation theology. We will take a look at its merits and also its limitations. For those of you who have been with us since the beginning, you recall the programs of the past few weeks. Last week we said desaline is all we need. We spoke about all the misery of the world. We spoke about Black Jesus. We said Black Jesus ain't the way either, after having said superstition ain't the way. We spoke about restitution, reparations, and remembré. We will say a few words about that today again. And then before that, we took a closer look at Christianity. Christianity in terms of how it developed and how it landed in our native Haiti, where we grew up in a Christian church, a particular church established by Black Americans who left the United States to establish themselves in Haiti in the mid 1800s. And so today, as our focus is on liberation theology, we will be looking at, who are the main players of liberation theology, what it tried to accomplish, and what we consider to be its merits, what it has achieved, and what are the limitations of liberation theology from our own perspectives. And so I will speak about my own introduction to that theology through a book titled The Gospel in Solentiname. And I'll say a few words about my favorite Jesus. And another person from the uh, School of Liberation Theology that has had an impact on me is Dr. Jean-Bertrand Aristide, whose book you see here, Haiti, Poésie philosophique pour décolonisation mentale. I translated the foreword of this book that was drafted in the original English by Dr. Molefikete Asante. And so, yes, a few words about this liberation theologian who became the first liberation theologian to become a head of state in Haiti, how it started and how it ended. And then I'll speak about three individuals who explain, I guess, in my view, the trajectory that we have been taking since the 1980s with liberation theology, or 1960s. Father Joseph Augustin, a Catholic priest, Dr. Jean Fils-Aimé, who is a Haitian, former Haitian pastor, and Dr. Ray Hagins, a Pentecostal Black American pastor. And I believe these individuals kind of summarize what I see as a path forward, as a progression from that time. And then, we'll take a look at a few references, and we'll take your say on the matter using this WhatsApp number where you can call. Okay, let's go full speed. And again, of course, if you've just joined, please like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and share with others that you know might be interested in the topic, but may not be on these platforms. Maybe you can send them the YouTube link on their email address or their WhatsApp number. All right. Liberation theology, when you say this word, you think about Father Oscar Romero, of course, but folks might also remember those nuns, those four nuns who were violently attacked, raped, and murdered in El Salvador in 1980. That same year when they also murdered Archbishop Oscar Romero of El Salvador. What is important for us to keep in mind here whenever we talk about liberation theology and its champions, it's to look at what was the goal of liberation theology and how the church from which it came, the Catholic Church, reacted to the thing. So nuns, such as these four American ladies, stood to defend the impoverished people of El Salvador. They considered that it was their duty, their responsibility to do so. Maura Clark, Ita Ford, Dorothy Kazel, and Jean Donovan. On December the 2nd, 1980, they were raped and murdered, like I said. What was the reaction of their government, their native United States of North America? Well, I think the statement by U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Jean Kirkpatrick, is quite emblematic of the attitude that the United States adopted, but not only the United States, as you will see. The Holy See Inc., the Catholic Church itself, the headquarter, how they reacted to this bloody murder in El Salvador. Jean Kirkpatrick is quoted saying, "The nuns were not just nuns, they were political activists on behalf of the Frente, the Salvadoran guerrillas." It sounds very odd for a US ambassador, a woman, reacting to 4 women who were raped and murdered, 4 white women from the United States, her own country. This sounds odd. There were all kinds of accusations that these nuns, in fact, the guerrilla, or not the guerrilla, but the military junta in El Salvador at the time, was asking questions about, how were the nuns dressed? As if, if a nun is not dressed, with the full thing that usually nuns are recognized with, well, then therefore they're fair game for rape and murder. And so you can see echoes of that positioning of the military in El Salvador in the words of Jean Kirkpatrick. The nuns were not just nuns, they were political activists on behalf of the Frente. And so there were guardians of the faith, guardians of the CIA, guardians of the established disorder in El Salvador, because the military in El Salvador had the backing of the United States government and of the hierarchy of the church. Although, as you will see in the next slide, Archbishop Oscar Romero is one of those priests who decided that no, we cannot continue to preach to the people to be submissive in the face of repression, of oppression, and use those Bible verses, from Paul, which says, you have to bow in front of all authority because all authority comes from God, but rather to be inspired by John 2, verse 15 in the Bible, as we will see next time. Inside of the church at the time, the person who was really watching what was happening with liberation theology was Joseph Ratzinger. He was cardinal at the time, and they say during the 1980s, as prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, he criticized liberation theologians and twice silenced proponent Leonardo Boff, the Brazilian. Okay, so let's move to liberation theology and what it was trying to do. This is the bishop, Oscar Romero. He was murdered in March 1980, and the 4 nuns were murdered in December of that same year. And of course, Oscar Romero knew that by opting to side with the peasantry in El Salvador rather than the military and the economic elite, he was marked for death. Because that wasn't the traditional role assigned to the church in Latin America. The church, as we have seen in previous episodes, is the third M of the colonial and neo-colonial enterprise, whose job is to infiltrate the minds of the people who've been dispossessed of their lands so that they accept their condition as being God ordained, and that now they need to spend all of their energy trying to qualify for heaven and forget about the earthly possessions that were taken away from them. This is my analysis of the role of the church in Latin America. And so Oscar Anulfo Romero y Galdames said, if God accepts the sacrifice of my life, may my death be for the freedom of my people. A bishop will die, but the church of God, which is the people, will never perish. I do not believe in death without resurrection. If they kill me, I will rise again in the people of El Salvador. You can see in the statement such a profound dedication to the church. But Oscar Romero knew that the church did not care that much about him because he saw how the church had behaved all along, and he knew that he didn't have the support of the church for the positioning that he was doing in favor of the poor. But still, he told you that what he was doing here was on behalf of the church. In earlier episodes, we saw how Dr. Martin Luther King had that same kind of conflict where he was trying to preserve the church and he was talking about the inner church, the iglesia. For all of these men, you feel that they are hoping beyond hope. If they kill me, I will rise again in the hope, in the people of El Salvador. And what did they do? Oscar Romero inherited death. When he was killed, the church did not do anything to prevent his killing, nor did they help with the investigation to find out who killed him. In fact, many consider that the church might have been implicated in his assassination. But in 2018, they named him a saint. There's a process, as you know, for the Catholic Church to name human beings a saint. And what happened to the guardian who was persecuting him at the time? Joseph Ratzinger, who was the prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine, and he was persecuting all of the Liberation theologians. Well, Joseph Ratzinger went on to become Pope Benedict. Yes, the guy who was before the guy who just died. Yeah, and so it works. Liberation theology, they sometimes attribute its birth, or that they claim that Gustavo Gutierrez is the father of liberation theology. He actually left us last October. He's a Peruvian father, and he's done great works to bring this idea within the church that they do not need to always side with power, the priest. That is, they could actually take their inspiration from John 2, verse 15, which reads as follows. After making a whip out of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple, including the sheep and the cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and knocked over their tables. Now, of course, I've mentioned many times that this is my favorite Jesus, and this painting that you see here is from the church where my father and my grandfather served in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, the St. Trinity Cathedral. You know, Jesus chasing the thieves from the church is something that always attracts the eye of impressionable children, as I was, because it, you know, it speaks of justice, and we all, as human beings, value an avenger of the vulnerable, because it is said in those scriptures that Jesus considered that these folks who were making long prayers and wearing long robes were thieves. They were demagogues. They were hypocrites. They were making those long prayers, pretending to be humble, to pretending to be holy, when in reality they were robbing the widows of their money. And so that's why Jesus used violence against the thieves. This is very much the kind of discourse that attracted me as a university student when I took a liberation theology course in my final year. And one of the books we had to read was The Gospel in Solentiname. And I can say this book had a profound impact on me. Ernesto Cardenal was explaining how the priests in Latin America were faced with a dilemma because the parishioners who were coming to their churches barely could read and write Spanish, yet they were teaching them, the stories that were in the Bible, but most of the time these stories didn't make sense to them because they were facing the brutality of the military dictatorship. They were facing hunger, the lack of resources to be able to, farm their lands productively, send their kids to school, etc. These are the things that were important to them. And so in the gospel in Solentiname, Ernesto Cardenal explained how these priests, for a while, put the Bible aside and started sitting with the peasants and having conversations and trying to find Christ in their community, as opposed to taking a Christ from a book and dumping it into their peasant communities in Latin America. This was a powerful discovery for me because this is also the same year that my father, who was an Episcopalian priest, was passing. He was critically ill, and I had not had the opportunity to have these conversations with him, uh, barely in that final year. And so reading Ernesto Cardenal's book, I started to develop a new sense of respect and admiration for my father because he lived in peasant communities in Haiti, and I saw him having those conversations in the mountain of Haiti, and struggling to organize the community so that they could have access to running water, farming, etc. So there was a social work that was involved in his mandate as an Episcopalian priest that I always admired, but I never really saw the connection between that and the theology until I started reading the Gospel in Solentiname and seeing how, okay, this is a global reality. So, liberation theology provides a framework for understanding the Christian faith as a force for social justice and liberation, challenging traditional theological perspectives and advocating for radical change in the world. But as I said, wherever you're going to find the Leonardo Buffs, the Gustavo Gutierrez, the Ernesto Cardenal, the Oscar Romeros, uh, you are going to find opposition to them in the faces of Joseph Ratzinger or the rest of the hierarchy of those churches. And so that same year, 1990, that I was taking this course, jumping over to 1991, is the same year that something very profound was happening in Haiti, my native Haiti. For the first time in history, a liberation theologian participated in an electoral process and won. So Jean-Bertrand Aristide became the first liberation theologian to have won the election. And I recall how I was in Haiti in February 1991 when he was supposed to swear in, and there was a coup attempt just a month earlier in January. And so, having filmed, the reaction of the population to the coup attempt, and returning to University of Waterloo and presenting that to my Liberation Theology class, I was guaranteed to graduate with the highest score for that one course because this was live reporting from Haiti. What happens when a liberation theologian becomes president and the Vatican and the CIA are not happy about it? Tragically, that same year, 1991, that Jean-Bertrand Aristide swore in February 7th, on February 7th, I had returned to Haiti to live and to stay there permanently. My diploma came to my house in Port-au-Prince, and I had no plan on leaving Haiti except that this governance did not last any more than 7 months, and all of the thousands upon thousands of Haitians who left Dominican Republic, the Caribbean, the Bahamas, the United States, Canada, Europe, Africa to go back to Haiti were trapped and looking for ways to go back to those other places where they were living before. We live in a very violent world. And so these aspirations of liberation theologians like Aristide, who writes In the Parish of the Poor, Tout Moun Se Moun, and other books of his, and it states here the structure of apartheid is still rooted in Haitian society. When you have apartheid, you don't see those behind the walls. That is the reality of Haiti. You can analyze this all you can. Changing it is not that easy. And this is what liberation theologians such as Aristide have tried. And as I've shown before, even the most progressive elements within the church who are trying to bring about this change are confronted with a lot of personal conflict. Jean-Bertrand Aristide, at the time that he became president, was still a Catholic priest, although the church was reacting to his positioning. He was expelled from the country a couple of times, and eventually he decided to forego his status as a priest and decided to marry and have children. However, this personal conflict is something that I discuss in Vive Bon Dia by Religion as something that is fundamental, that affects all African people who grew up in Judeo Christianity or in Islam or under the influence of these faiths. And that's why I will spend some time to talk about the works of Father Joseph Augustin, who is also another Haitian liberation theologian who lived in Montreal. I had the opportunity to meet him and had a few very, very interesting, precious conversations with him while he was alive. And he really inspired me as I was writing Vive Bon Dia by Religion. In the book, I say all priests, all pastors suffer the impact of Europeanized zombification. Oh, wordplay here, Europeanization and zombification. You know, the concept of a zombie is a human being from whom you have taken the will, the ability to make its own decisions. And so, in my analysis, introducing Judeo Christianity in populations that were subjugated by Europeans has the impact of fundamentally, profoundly affecting the soul of those individuals. regardless of their level of education, sometimes because of their level of education, and regardless of their position as a layman or a priest or pastor. And I say it is pandemic all over the world, and it spares none. As you can see, this painting here is those murals are from the Saint Trinity Cathedral in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince, where, like I said, my father and my grandfather both administered that cathedral for many years. You can see even in the pictures, the Christ, although it's considered to be a progressive effort because the Christ is not depicted as white, but it is somewhere halfway. It cannot be black like most Haitians either. So it is kind of beige or orange with long European looking hair. It's kind of like a compromise. This is the result of Europeanization, Europeanized zombification. And like I mentioned, this doesn't mean that individuals who partake in this thing are, the ones who are suffering from colonization, and the ones who are woke and liberated do not get affected by it. No. We've discussed again this picture here. This is a screenshot from Spike Lee's emblematic, amazing film work, Malcolm X. Reverend Earl Little, the father of Malik Shabazz el-Shabazz, Malcolm X, who was a revolutionary preacher, a righteous brother who was fighting the good fight for his people, yet right behind him was the white Jesus on the cross, just like you can see the white Jesus on the cross behind Father Jean-Bertrand Aristide, or you would have seen him behind my father or my grandfather in their churches. Again, Europeanized zombification is pandemic, and it spares none. And so let us speak about these men who have tried their best to make positive change from within. Father Joseph Augustin wrote one of his books is Le Vaudou Libérateur, which I had the opportunity to uh, read and discuss with him as I was writing Vive Bon Dia Ba Religion in the late 1990s. And what he says here, I think, summarizes it well. Until now, all the education we received had taught us to turn our backs on our own culture. In fact, the whole of Haitian society is impacted by this issue. The Catholic Church controls roughly 95% of the Haitian masses. And whether they like it or not, every Haitian bears its mark. We cannot rid ourselves of our alienations overnight. The work we are undertaking here is intended to be the testimony of a personal conflict. And indeed, I speak about this conflict in Vive Bon Dia Ba Religion. Father Joseph Augustin is known for his approach of making our Christian culture, what he calls our Christian culture, um, without, like, inculturé. Like, he's taking the Europeanized zombification venom from Judeo-Christianity. That's his attempt. And so he introduced the African drums inside of the church, the symbols, and there's been a profound change in the rituals, the way worship takes place inside of the Catholic Church, the way people dress, the ceremonies, in how the peasants bring their own fruits and vegetables and the products of their land inside of the church as offerings. But you know, when you read inside of the book, and I mentioned that in Vive Bon Dieu à la Religion, Father Joseph Augustin himself admits that all of this effort is actually to save the church from collapse and irrelevancy. It is not to liberate the parishioner, but rather to save the church, to make it relevant. And so, like he says here, this is a personal conflict because there has been a understanding from that these men have developed that, you know, the peasants or the Haitians, the Africans in the neo colony cannot do without the foreign superstition, Judeo Christianity. That it, there's just too much in it. It's like, the saying, you cannot throw the baby with the bathwater. But in reality, there's no baby, it's all bathwater. This is my conclusion, I respectfully say. And this has been the conclusion of Dr. Jean Fils-Aimé, who has done a similar work on the Protestant side. Jean Fils-Aimé, whose program is still progressing, he has a weekly program on Wednesday that starts at 6 that I was just following before this. Used to have his own church in Montreal, grew up in the church, was a fervent, minister, very, successful in his church in Montreal. One of those folks who went to theology school and, was clearly an intellectual within that grouping. And then he explains, as he's said in several interviews that he's given to others and to myself included, that he realized that no, he cannot continue to do this because he discovered that this Christianity that he was preaching was established on all of these things that we saw in the previous episodes. So, in one of his more recent books, Being Black, a Western Fabrication, Dr. Fils-Aimé says, once we understand the mechanisms of the Western fabrication of the Black, we have two choices: to accept the state of affairs like a fate and perpetuate our situation, or to break the matrix, to take our destiny in hand, to change our situation. And if you've been following the programs that Jean Fils-Aimé produces on Sundays and Wednesdays in French and Haitian Creole, it is clear that he has made his choice. And it is not to accept the state of affairs, but rather to break the matrix, to take our destiny in hand, and to change our situation. The last example that I'll take is Dr. Ray Hagins, African American. He leads the African Village, and cultural center of New York City. You can go on his website, you will find a full biography that explains what he's doing and how long he's been doing it and how you could partake in what he's doing. But he says, many people have asked me about how I made the transition from a Pentecostal minister who was sold out for the so-called gospel of Jesus Christ to African conscious minister and warrior for the liberation of Black African people. And I can tell you that my view since I wrote Vive Bon Dieu à la Religion in 2000 was that this path is inevitable. There's just no way you can continue to peddle white Jesus and have a billion Black people around the world, kneeling to that statue and these other statues that are linked to it, and, have a go at it. Not in a world where people see the outcome. Well, for instance, you have one of those affirmative action saints, this man, Toussaint, Pierre Toussaint. This guy died long ago, And there's a number of very patient Haitians who are waiting, begging these old white men in long robes in Rome to make him a saint, as if this is the path. So in real life, a number of Africans are begging for a few black people to be hired in the US government in high positions, like have Barack Obama's, Colin Powell's, and Michael Langley's, and Condoleezza Rice's, and Michael Jean's in Canada, and Ramayade in France, as if this is our path to some kind of salvation. Yet we are seeing time and time again that all of these individuals are used by global white supremacy against the interest of our people, just like it's happening today against Burkina Faso, against Haiti, against the Congo, and all over the place. And in the spiritual realm, we are seeing the same pattern. Those patient Africans who are waiting for a couple of affirmative action black saints. The hell with that. Our children are deserving of a better future than that. This is very childish. And so there's a sister who was talking about how separation is what is required. You cannot continue to beg for acceptance into a thing that is telling you that it is not yours. You've seen those images of, the black cardinal who's waiting for a hug from the white cardinal who, pretends that he didn't see him, and when he hugged all of the white cardinals before the black guy. Like, why are you guys begging for acceptance in a thing that's not yours? It doesn't serve the purpose of your people. Of course, we're saying that because, okay, we're saying that, okay, these are supposed to be Africans. But again, these are individuals. Maybe they do not identify with Black folks or African people. And so that's why folks like Ray Hagins have decided to rescue the time that we have instead of wasting that time thinking about the ancestors of the Judeo Christian faith, to actually think about our real ancestors who fought so that we could be alive today. And that's why I propose adding to this process where folks like Ray Hagins has a congregation, and the focus is, the African Village Cultural Center in New York City. I propose that all of us, all around the world, must have the ability to create such villages, but an element of it should be from reparations. That is, we've seen these images of Europeans, I don't remember what year that was, who had gone to Haiti and they were walking the streets in chains, all white Americans and Christians, and they were saying that they were sorry for their ancestors having participated in racial slavery and all of that. Yeah, this to me is theater. That's not what we need. We need tangible reparations. And what I've put on the table is that in churches such as the United Church or the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, where there is a congregation of rich white men and women who consider that, yes, indeed, we need to repay. We need to repair some of the damages that our ancestors caused to these damaged African people, this damaged native people of the Americas and of Africa. Well, what you need to do is to turn over the keys. Turn over the keys of your church, of the properties, the land, to the native peoples of Africa and of the Americas, so that they can transform those former churches into healing centers called remembrés. And the idea would be when you enter one of those remembrance centers, you will not see statues and pictures of white Jesus, white Mary, white Joseph. All of these imaginary beings would be taken down, and statues and pictures and all of that would be of Lapu-Lapu. Who is Lapu-Lapu? This is the Filipino warrior who fought against the invaders of the Philippines, Magellan. And Magellan was killed by those resisting indigenous people. And I take this moment to pay respects to the Filipino community, the global Filipino community, who was suffering because of the tragedy that happened last week in Vancouver, where someone who apparently had psychological problems murdered 11 people and many others are wounded. Yes, Lapu-Lapu is deserving of annual celebrations like Filipinos are offering him on a yearly basis. But I submit to you, in a Remembrance Center, it is worthy to have information about Lapu-Lapu so that children in Nigeria, children in Haiti, children in Montreal, children in Paris, children in Sydney, Australia, can learn about the history of resistance to the Mahafa so that they can be inspired by the spirits of people like Winnie Madikileza Mandela, of Coretta Scott King, Shaka Zulu, Tupac Amaru, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Thomas Sankara, because it's all one humanity. John Brown, this white man who took up arms and fought against the US government so that he could overthrow racial slavery in the 1850s. Yeah. This is the path that we are proposing. And so, in a very concrete manner, as you know, today, April the 30th, was a global day of solidarity with the brothers and sisters in Burkina Faso and brother Ibrahim Traore. I will take this moment to remind folks that of that call that we've issued since 2 years ago, where we say we call on all Africans, particularly Black soldiers worldwide, regardless of the national army in which they are enrolled, to categorically refuse taking part in any imperialist invasion of Haiti, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, all our countries that resist against neocolonial slavers, insatiable terrorist and mineral resources thieves. Black nationhood matters. Indeed, the liberation theologians asked, what would Jesus do? You've heard this phrase, right? Whenever there's a crisis in the world, people say, what would Jesus do? And for the liberation theologians, the Jesus that they're thinking about is the Jesus of John 2, verse 15, the guy who saw injustice and took action against the purveyors of injustice. He was defending the widows. But we say in 2025, that expression that our Black American brothers use, we need Jesus or you need Jesus, that ain't the thing anymore. I propose that we now ask, what would Dessalines do? Indeed, the liberator of Haiti was very clear about what he meant when he said tout moun c'est moun. Every human being is a human being, nothing more, nothing less. And that means every time that humanity is challenged, the least among us, the most fragile, the most vulnerable among us is attacked, the rest of us who are well off, better off, should stand up to defend their humanity, their integrity. And so, a few references here as I remind you of the phone number that you can dial now to participate in a brief conversation with me is 613-482-2549 via WhatsApp, and I'll be very glad to have a couple of words with you. The Gospel in Solentiname, Ernesto Cardenal's book, is highly recommended. Dr. Jean Fils-Aimé, jeanfils-aimé.com, you can find his website. Dr. Jean-Bertrand Aristide's book is quite an interesting read. It makes commentary on specific articles of the Black Code. You know, this book that Colbert penned in 1685 for the French in order to legislate how racial slavery was to be governed. And the British inspired themselves from it, the Spanish and all the other slavers. So it's interesting to see the perspective of a former priest, liberation theologian Jean-Bertrand Aristide, on the Black Code. As you know, the Black Code, you know, when they start talking in the Black Code, it's Louis par la grâce de Dieu. It's always in the name of God that they are instituting all of these rules about, you know, how to mistreat the Africans. How Europe Entered Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney, must read material. The couple of these books here that I show you that are in French, I don't know if they're available in English. I don't think Brother Jean Fils-Aimé's Vaudou Je me souviens is available in English, but his other book, Être Noir, or Being Black, that one is translated in English. This is the cover of Dr. Aristide's book. And the foreword here is that I translated in there. Where is it? Is the work of Dr. Molefi-Kete Asante. Yeah, Dr. He's written The History of Africa, Dr. Molefi-Kete Asante. Anyways, these books you can most of them you can access directly online. And you can also check out my website, jafricahaiti.com, where you can access my work published in Haitian Creole, in French, and in English. And so I didn't think that you like to read, brother. I like all of these books. I will put them on my Amazon wish list. Okay. Well, thank you for letting me know. Okay, so as I don't know, I don't see too many, I don't see comments on online, and so I will just quickly remind folks that, you know, one more minute. If you wish to make a call, I will entertain that. Just dial 613. Where's the number? 613-482-2549. Now, next week, we are likely not going to have a new episode because I will be on the road. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to at least bring you one episode live from the motherland. Like I said, today, there were folks standing in solidarity with Brother Ibrahim Traore from all over the world. It makes us very proud. Even right here in Ottawa, there was a demonstration. This is something that is important for Canadians to watch as well, because as some of you may know, Canadian mining corporations are notorious for this approach of, you know, counting on their governments to participate in imperialist attacks, coups, invasions, harassment, socioeconomic boycott, usually led by the United States, and then Canada just goes along. And then the idea is to always place in power in those countries, whether it is in the Congo in Africa, or in Burkina Faso, Sierra Leone, or in Latin America, in Guatemala, in Haiti. subservient dictatorships that will be corrupt, and then these multinational corporations then can have access to the gold, the lithium, the coltan at cheap price. They just pay the corrupt leaders, and then the people never have an opportunity to see their gold, their coltan, their uranium used for their own benefit. This is what needs to change. And so that's why we say, the question is, what would Dessalines do? Would Dessalines sit down and say, well, what's happening in Sierra Leone or in Burkina Faso is none of my business? Hell no. We believe that we are all part of one humanity, and especially us Black folks. We need to understand that getting on a boat and crossing the Atlantic doesn't change who we are. It's not as if, as you are on the boat, your DNA changed. I know there are some of my brothers and sisters following this program who are, fierce nationalists. They're nationalists of a little piece of land, when in reality we are a family. And we explain again that we are all one boat stop away from each other. We have cousins all over the Caribbean. The same family, the same DNA has been distributed in Barbados, in the Bahamas. And yes, of course, because we haven't done our homework, those of us who know how to read and write, yes, so today you have Africans in the Bahamas who are cursing other Africans, calling them Haitians. Just like you have Africans in Haiti who are confused enough to be cursing each other, using names of their own ancestors, thinking it is derogatory. Congo, Hausa, because we haven't done our homework. We have been family, and we will always be family. This is all I had to share with you today, brothers and sisters. I wish you all the best. And let's see if I could find some inspiration here. Yes, this restitution jingle, Haiti reminding the French that we want and we need our money back, friends.
Réparation, restitution à demander. Célébration, 604 de l'indépendance. Que c'est 1 milliard, 685 millions. 135 000, 171,48. La France paye $1 moins pour péter l'indépendance. Réparation, restitution. La France gagne $1 moins pour péter l'indépendance. Réparation, restitution. La France paye $1 moins pour péter l'indépendance. Réparation, restitution. La France gagne $1 moins pour péter l'indépendance. Réparation, restitution. La France gagne la terre pour péter liberté.
Women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home. For it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church.
Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites.
Jésus, par ton sang précieux, enlève mon iniquité. Regarde-moi sur les cieux, dis-moi que tu m'as pardonné. J'ai longtemps erré cœur rebelle, mais j'entends ta voix qui m'appelle. Au pied de ta croix maintenant, tout conflit brisé. Blanc, plus blanc que neige. Blanc, plus blanc que neige. Lavé dans le sang de l'agneau, je serai plus blanc que la neige.
Now go, attack the Amalekites, and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. 1 Samuel 15.